Hey everyone, my name is Ryan and I am a Bible nerd. Recently, I had an opportunity to do a presentation for my men's Bible study group, and I wanted to kind of go to a different topic. We've been studying the book of Romans, so I didn't want to kind of build on that. So I thought, let's do a different topic as we take kind of a little bit of a break from that as the teacher was out of town. So he asked me to kind of fill in. I filled in a couple times. It's been a great opportunity to put these slides together and do some presentation, kind of work on my public speaking skills, and just really enjoy nerding out on this stuff, but I really haven't spent any time studying the Crusades. I've never really been into the kind of the medieval Dark Ages kind of time frame. I just really enjoy studying kind of the Roman eras, Greek eras, New Testament, Old Testament kind of time frames. I just really haven't spent that much time in kind of the medieval or the Crusade kind of time period. So I thought it was really time to kind of dig into that a little bit better, understand it a little bit better, just to also understand some of the history that we even see playing out even to this day in Jerusalem and Israel and Palestine and all those things. I think it's really important to understand the religious significance, just the human history significance of these things. And I just found it really fascinating and a great opportunity to just dive into this topic a little bit further. So I was able to break it up into two parts. So I just want to give you some overview. Hopefully, it'll encourage you to maybe research some of these topics a little bit further. Maybe I'll have an opportunity to dive into these a little bit further. But here's kind of part one of my two-part series on the Crusades, what I'm calling the Clash of Faiths. Now, the first thing to understand about the Crusades, we need to understand a little bit better the rise of Islam. And I don't know enough about that religious group. I've studied a little bit more. I've started watching more videos. There's a guy named God Logic that I've really enjoyed watching his videos and some of the discussions that he has. And in my culture, my area, there isn't a lot of Muslims or Islamic faith people, that type of stuff. There isn't that much. So I don't run into that religious group very much. And so I find it pretty interesting to kind of study some of the history that led to the rise of Islam in that particular area of the world. So let's first talk about why that's a significant part and why it eventually led into the idea of the Crusades. So, first, we need to understand the Prophet Muhammad. He was born in Mecca in present day Saudi Arabia, and he lived from 570 to 632 AD. He was orphaned at a young age and was raised by his grandfather and later an uncle. And around age 40 in 610 AD, he began receiving revelation from God through, or Allah, through the angel Gabriel. This continued for about 23 years and makes up the holy book of Islam called the Quran. Now, the first occurrence took place between the prophet and the angel Gabriel in a cave of Hira or Hira, Hira. I hope I'm pronouncing that close. But that's where this first encounter happened with the angel. And what his message that he received was really emphasizing monotheism and a call for social justice, compassion, and moral integrity. Now, initially, his movement was faced with opposition from leaders in Mecca as his teachings threatened the social and economic interests of the time. And by 622 AD, Muhammad and his growing group of followers made the Hijra, or migration from Mecca to Medina to escape persecution. Now, in Medina, it was pretty fascinating. They created the first unified community and outlined rules and responsibilities for Muslims and non-Muslims in the area, which became known as the UMA or UMMA document, which was also known as the first written constitution. So that was kind of the idea of the rules, and you can really see the social responsibility, some of the personal integrity that was kind of built into these constitutional type documents for this early settlement, this early area of the Islamic faith. And then after the prophet's death in 632 AD, his successor, Abu Baruch, Bakr, hopefully again I'm pronouncing that correctly, and no disrespect if I'm pronouncing it wrong, but he became the successor during kind of this era after Muhammad's death that ended up being known as the Ridda Wars or even the Wars of Apostasy. It was designed to suppress some of the tribal rebellions, which were aimed at breaking away from this newly formed Islamic state. And these battles and these victories really unified the Arabian Peninsula and eventually expanded the Islamic Empire all the way to the fringes of the Roman and the Persian empires at the time. So it's a pretty fascinating part of how much this was unifying kind of the area. not only were the people that were just upset with Roman rule for centuries and some of the things that they did during the Roman rule, but just the unified presence of this new Islamic faith. And then we have the Battle of Yarmouk, Yarmouk. Sorry, Yarmouk. I hope I'm pronouncing that again right. Yarmouk is what I most commonly heard it said on the internet. But this was one of the most significant events in history I really hadn't heard anything about. What was left of the Roman Empire, known as the Byzantines, and what was left of the Persian Empire, they were in this decade-long battle that was known as the Last Great War of Antiquity, and it really weakened both sides. This allowed for this expansion of this new Arab nation, this newly founded Islam, and it started off as these little smaller raids, the Ridda Wars, kind of these raids all over the place. But by 633, following a defeat in Damascus, both Persia and Romans took notice of this newly formed group. And by 636 AD, the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, raised a massive army, reported at 150,000 men. But this number also led to its downfall. It was very hard to maintain such a huge force, especially with limited resources in that area, and then coordinating and executing orders between the different generals, and even some of the religious tension that was starting to already build between these two groups really makes this a hugely significant battle that I didn't really study enough about. It's pretty fascinating learning the history of how the Roman side was really doing well for the first couple days of this battle, and the women on the Arab side really rallied their men and rallied the troops. And it's very historic how the women were a big part of kind of getting the troops to get back on the field and really rally behind it, and then they just blitzed right through it. I mean, it's an incredible change of events that happened over the initial battle that happened. But it's well worth studying if you have time. Just even look that up. It's a very, very historic part of the history of this region. And then we have the emperor of the Eastern Empire, or the Byzantine Empire. He was around during the kind of the birth of Islam, and even his deeds are mentioned in the Quran. Now, I looked up his name a couple different ways. It's pronounced a couple different ways, but Heraclitus is what I saw the most. So I could be pronouncing that wrong. It's Heraclius. He was the emperor from 610 AD to around 641 AD. He has a pretty famous quote after that battle where he saw that he was just losing that part of his province. Then he had this to say. He said, "Farewell, a long farewell to Syria, my fair province. Thou art an infidel's now. Peace be with you, O Syria. What a beautiful land you will be for the enemy." And the emperor planned to consolidate troops in Egypt and a couple other areas, yet the imperial forces were just helpless to stop this Arab steamroller that took less than a century to occupy most of the eastern provinces, from Syria to Mesopotamia to Egypt, North Africa, and even into Spain. I mean, these forces just fell like dominoes to this steamroller of the Islamic armies. And here's a map you can see on the YouTube channel. Again, if you're watching the podcast, you can kind of see this map on my YouTube channel. But it really shows these different waves of the different leaders that started taking over this kind of southern part of the Mediterranean, along with the eastern edge of the Roman Empire, and even all the way up into Spain as you go further and further west. In 638 AD, so we back up a little bit. If we go back to this initial battle that was about 2 years after that Yarmouk battle that was badly lost by the Roman side, about 2 years later, they were able to conquer the city of Jerusalem. It had become a very important religious site in the Islamic faith. And this really marked the beginning of the Muslim rule that would last for centuries under various Muslim powers in the region, all the way up to the Arab-Israeli War of 1948, which created the state of Israel and then divided Israel and Jordan. Then again in 1967, you have the Six-Day War that unified the East Jerusalem under Israeli control. I mean, there's just all kinds of history and all kinds of different things that have happened in this region. I mean, it's just amazing what's happened for centuries and all the emphasis of major religious groups in this particular area. But by the 7th century, the rapidly expanding Islamic empire stretched all the way from Spain, North Africa, Middle East, all the way to Pakistan. And it was in such an incredibly short amount of time relative to other empires like Roman and Alexander the Great, the Ottomans, the Babylonians, the Assyrians. it really is quite impressive the time frame it took for those territories to fall under this new Arab or Islamic nation. But that map is really, I think, pretty fascinating on the different waves and kind of what they took and at what times that they took those particular territories. So now let's talk a little bit about why Jerusalem is such an important site in the Islamic faith. It's the third holiest site in Islam, where we have the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is located on the southern part of the Temple Mount. What happened here is known as the Night Journey, and it's one of the most significant events in the Islamic tradition. This happened about 11 years after the first meetings with the angel Gabriel and the prophet, what we'd actually have a date for of February 26, 621 AD. Muhammad was taken by a winged kind of hybrid horse donkey creature of some kind with the angel Gabriel from Mecca to the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, which is 770 miles away. So it's known as the night journey. And even the name of the winged creature is like lightning, because it was able to go so quick and just carry him to this site in Jerusalem. He then ascended into 7 levels of heaven and led with other prophets in prayer, including Adam, John the Baptist, Moses, Abraham, Jesus. They all prayed on these kind of levels of heaven as he ascends into the presence of Allah. And that's what's known as the Dome of the Rock. This is where that ascension through the heaven reached the very presence of Allah and received the command for Muslims to pray 5 times a day, which is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. And Muhammad was cleansed and prepared for this journey through the heavens by Gabriel, the angel Gabriel, and by Michael, in which they removed all traces of error, doubt, idolatry, paganism, which then filled the prophet's heart with wisdom and belief. So I didn't know fully kind of the differences between the two sites, because I knew of the Dome of the Rock. You've got that big dome and that gold top on it, but I didn't realize kind of the mosque that was just to the south of it, what it represented fully. So part of this was really interesting to kind of study these holy sites, not only as part of the Crusade study I'm doing, but I'm also going to the Holy Land in June. And so I wanted to know a little bit more about the history after the Romans destroyed the Jewish temple in 70 AD, and these buildings and some of these things that were placed there, and just the significance. So you got 3 major world religions all have significant events that happen in this place. I think that's just incredible. These stories that we read have a physical location where Jesus walked, where Muhammad walked. I mean, it's just amazing to me. I love nerding out and studying this stuff, and that there's actually a place that you can go that represents where these events happened. And I just think it's absolutely incredible. So I'm really looking forward to that trip to the Holy Land in June. And I'm actually doing some fundraising. If you can help with that trip, I'd love to have you help. You can go to my website at BibleNerd.com. You can donate to help that trip happen. There's merchandise that you can purchase that part of the proceeds go towards that trip. I'm just really excited to physically go to some of these places where just history and religion and theology, all this just happened at these places. I just can't wait. It's just gonna be so much fun. And it just I really feel like it's a pilgrimage to go back to really see these places I've been studying about for so long. So let's talk a little bit about the Byzantine Empire. And it's funny, just the other day, after I've done this presentation, I heard somebody call it something different that just was I don't know if it was their English accent or something. They called it the Byzantine or something like that. I've never heard it called that. So I'm just going to stick with the Byzantine Empire. But it was really the eastern side of the Roman Empire, and it had its capital in Constantinople, which preserved a vast body of ancient Greek and Roman knowledge, including philosophy and mathematics, literature, law, art. I mean, so many things of Christian thought and theology was all kind of housed and preserved in the eastern part of the empire here at Constantinople. In fact, the church at Constantinople played a vital role in maintaining Christian faith and a center of theological discourse, including 4 councils. There's 4 ecumenical councils that happened at the church there in Constantinople, including the second one right after the Nicene Creeds in 325. So in 381 was the second council that was there at Constantinople, along with one at 553, 680, and 869. And really fascinating studying all these councils from Nicaea all the way on, and how they're just wrestling with Trinitarian ideas of what do you mean by God's will and how does that differ from Jesus's? How does the Son of, or how does the Holy Spirit tie into all this? What substance are they made of? Who came from what? I mean, it's unbelievable the deep theological discourse that happens during these councils. But you can also see that some of these councils start causing rifts where people don't necessarily agree with what Scripture says or what their interpretation of, where their authority is. All that starts to get poked on a little bit as we get further and further away, and some of the events that happen during these councils. But this is really a fundamental city in the Eastern Empire, the Byzantine Empire, the Orthodox religion. I mean, it's a major, major part of some of the events that happen, and even the preservation of the Greek language, the classic education that has this rich tradition that would later influence even the Renaissance. So I think it's just an incredible city, one I'd really like to go to and see some of the history, especially as I've studied some of this Crusade history. But we can't talk about kind of the Byzantine and some of these councils and the time leading up to the Crusades without talking about the Great Schism of 1054. After these councils and some of these theological disputes, especially over a major dispute known as the Filioque. What this was is they added to the Nicene Creed in the Western Church and the Son. That's what Filioque means, and the Son was kind of added to this Nicene Creed that said where the Holy Spirit came from. And it came from the Father or the Father and the Son. The Western really added that as part of their honoring of the Son and just part of how the Holy Spirit all played into this, where the Eastern Church said, no, it's just from the Father. And so that became a major theological dispute along with the substance and so many things that kind of led up to it. But why it's known as the Great Schism is in 1054, each side of the empire, each side of the churches, the ones in Rome and then the one in Constantinople, basically excommunicated the leader of the other side. So that's what really kind of capped off all the disagreements that just couldn't find common ground, couldn't work their way through it with councils. And by 1054, you now have the first kind of division of the Christian church. I mean, there's disputes between bishops and other areas, but this was like the first major separations between the Roman Catholics and the Orthodox. Now, since then, we've had other schisms, if you will. We've had the Protestant Reformation. You've got the other denominations. But this really was a major, major split that happened. And it's really important to know that date, 1054, because that's going to play out on some of these other dates as we start entering into the time of the Crusades. In 1071, the Seljuk Turks won a decisive battle and won a significant amount of territory in Asia Minor. This defeat not only diminished the resources of the Eastern Empire, but also created some power vacuums that allowed other groups to start challenging the Byzantine authority. So you got the schism in 1054, and about 1071, you've got this branch of the Turks, which is in kind of that northern part or kind of the eastern side of the Eastern Empire, was taking more and more and pushing closer and closer to Constantinople. And you're going to see that they're going to start causing issues with people trying to travel on Christian pilgrimages through those territories to get to Jerusalem. So tensions were definitely building between this growing empire of Islam and some of the religious pilgrims that were trying to travel from even the west and the eastern parts of the world down into the holy sites. So by 1095, the Byzantine emperor acknowledged and recognized he needed help, and he sent envoys to Pope Urban II in Rome requesting military assistance. Now, this marked a crucial moment as it provided the Pope with an opportunity to respond to requests from other Christian rulers for help against this aggressively expanding empire of Islam. And the plight of the Eastern Empire kind of galvanized the Western Christians to consider a collective response. So Pope Urban II called for the First Crusade at the Council of Clermont, rallying the knights and the noblemen all across the European area. And on the final day of the council, Pope Urban delivered this primary speech to reclaim the sites of Christendom, especially the holy city of Jerusalem. And what you see here is Jerusalem was a big part of the message. You can read the letter, you can read what he wrote, and its connections to Jesus's life, his crucifixion, the resurrection, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, all the events that kind of led to that major part of Christianity is the resurrection. Even Paul says if that didn't happen, Christianity is false. So I mean, it's a big part of it. And as more and more people are learning about it, and Christianity has made its way through the Roman Empire, more and more people wanted to travel and go to these sites and go on these pilgrimages. But more and more they were getting turned away, were persecuted, were charged a lot of extra money to go, as more and more of the Muslim empire had kind of taken over the routes that led from Rome and Europe and down through Constantinople and down into the Holy Land. So, as this Muslim control since the 7th century started to heighten this tension, and then you had the Celtic Turks kind of in the north were threatening local Christian populations and all these pilgrimages, it just made kind of the perfect storm for Pope Urban to rally kind of all of Christianity. And he also looked at it as a way to maybe mend the schism. This is still pretty relatively early on to the schisms, but it gave him kind of a unified common enemy, kind of a common thing that everybody could rally behind. And that's where you really see kind of the language that was used during his message to kind of rally everybody to get on to the Holy Land, to be able to clear it from these influences. Now, some people took it to the extreme, and that's where you'll see some very dark passages within the Crusades. But there's a rally cry, Deus Vult, which is God wills it in Latin. Again, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But it was this idea that kind of God wills this pilgrimage, this holy war, that we need to go down there and cleanse some of these Christian sites of these influences of the Islamic faith, especially when the Celtics kind of took over that northern part and really made it much more difficult for people to pilgrim down to these holy sites. Now, part of the Crusades is known as the People's Crusade. This is kind of pre-Crusades. It was also known as the Peasants or Paupers Crusade, or the People's Crusade. Was mainly untrained peasant armies that were just eager to heed the call of Pope Urban. It was led by this Roman Catholic priest named Peter the Hermit, and just the rally cry of all these people that were disenfranchised by plagues and other horrible things that were happening during that time of human existence. And the way to Jerusalem, as they were rallying all these people that were going across Europe, was marred by several massacre of Jews, which was never part of Pope Urban's message. There's nothing really in it that leads to that, but there's just such a religious fervor that happened during this time that the Jews ended up being just massacred or forced into conversion and baptism. Some really horrible things that happened as these people were kind of gathering together to head towards the Holy Land to free it from the Islamic oppression. And even after some of these events that happened, the clergy and the noblemen of Europe all condemned the killing of Jews on all other crusades. I mean, it really was marred by a horrible time and horrible excuse to just be able to eradicate Jewish people in Europe on the way to Jerusalem. And by the time the People's Crusade left the Byzantine controlled areas, they were absolutely annihilated by the Turkish ambushes. And this was in October of 1096, where they were still kind of on their way, while the more unified, the more trained group of known as the Prince's Crusade, which is really what we see when we think of kind of the Crusades, the armor they were wearing, some of that stuff is much more symbolic of kind of the actual First Crusade that was led as known as the Prince's Crusade. And they were working their way towards Constantinople, and they got there through kind of the end of 1096, right after the People's Crusade was just massacred on that side of kind of the empire. And they were gathering through about 1096 to about 1097 is where you have the Prince's Crusade, really what we call the First Crusade. And one of the big events that kind of led towards them being able to get to Jerusalem is when they were able to lay siege to the city of Nicaea that was taken over, and were able to kind of take back that city. It was a huge moment that really showed, okay, this is a true gathering. This is kind of the rally cry behind this particular crusade, and really send a message to the Celtics that, hey, there's a true force coming down, and it's working its way down towards Jerusalem. And the siege was a crucial moment. It really illustrated the determination of the forces, and after weeks of fighting, the city finally surrenders in June of 1097, which also provided a big morale boost, and a strategic foothold that would really help in other events. And then the march to Jerusalem after capturing Nicaea was a big stepping stone to help with the shortage of supplies and just kind of reclaim that for the Byzantine Empire. That march was a big part of what led to the attempted siege of Jerusalem in 1099. So this is really where the Crusades really start. This is really where we start to see this unified force work its way down towards the Holy Land to try to free it from the quote unquote oppressive rule of the Islamic nation. So I hope you found that useful. Let me know what I got right and wrong. Probably some pronunciations wrong, but I just had a lot of fun studying this. And the more I study, the more I could probably spend a lot more time on each kind of section, each battle. But it really opened my eyes to some of the time frames, some of the things that were happening during that time. So I'd love to have your thoughts, comments, highlight of any other videos you've seen. They're really helpful for this topic. And I'd really love to study a little bit further. So that'll be it for part one. Watch for part two. I will put that out next week. And again, please like, subscribe, comment, check out my website, YouTube, Facebook. Love to have you join those things. Check out my website where the fundraiser for the Holy Land trip is there at Bible Nerd. And again, nerd is with a 3 instead of an E. So it's Bible N3RD. But again, love nerding out on this stuff. I just really enjoy talking with this and just learning this stuff and just digging into it further and further. So hopefully that made a lot of sense. Hopefully that opened your eye, maybe ask some questions. Love to interact with this stuff and hope to see you on the next video. Have a wonderful day.